Hi everyone, it's me. And today, Chernobyl, Fukushima. Yes, we'll talk about nuclear fallout.
We're running low on supplies. Looks like I'll have to forage for food. Aha!
Are you sure you should be eating that?
Please don't.
I know it looks weird, but honestly, it just tastes like radioactive chicken.
Matthew, it is radioactive chicken.
Oh, sorry about your leg.
Nah, don't worry about it.
What?
I got plenty.
Why? Okay, yeah, so it's apocalypse. Alright, it's bad, so... Food theory!
Hello, Internet. Welcome to Food Theory.
Hello Internet, welcome to Food Theory! Hello?
Here to help you watch your post-apocalyptic wasteland. Loyal theorists, I'll come clean right off the bat. Today's episode was inspired by a video game. More specifically, it was inspired by the cooking mechanic within that video game. See, in Fallout 4, there's this really unique food situation at play that I can't really stop thinking about. You're living in the wake of nuclear war, and you have to feed yourself.
Apocalypse!
Basically, the game lets you take all the radioactive food and completely remove the radiation from it by cooking it over an open flame. Raw rad rat meat? That's gonna hit you with 2 rads of radiation. But a cooked rad rat meat steak? Now you're good to go with no problems whatsoever. Such is the power of cooking.
In the games! I'm just glad that MadPat is doing a game theory episode on food theory. So yeah, it's just wonderful to have this kind of collapse.
Obviously, that's not how radioactivity works. Or
Duh.
is it? See, that's what got me theorizing on this topic today. I realize that there are plenty of resources out there that discuss prepping for the apocalypse, but as far as for the post-apocalypse, well, not so much. What happens when your shelves of canned peaches and corn run out? What food, if any, would actually be safe to eat in a radioactive post-nuclear fallout wasteland? How would a real-life sole survivor go about preparing a square meal while minimizing their radiation exposure? 'Cause I don't know about you, but here in 2020, where every day it feels like we're inching closer and closer to the end of days, this is the stuff that I really want to know about.
You must remember that in the year 2020, in the year 2020, there was the global pandemic period. And it's the first year of the global pandemic period. Right now it's in the year 2022, so, oh gosh, we're still in the global pandemic. We are literally still in the global pandemic period in the year 2022.
So today we're exploring this explosive topic food theory style and vaulting right in. So how harmful is radiation? Turns out you have to be kind of specific when you ask this question because there are a lot of different kinds of radiation. Broadly speaking, they can be separated into 2 categories: ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. Putting it in simpler terms, you can think about these as high energy radiation or low energy radiation, or in even simpler terms, dangerous radiation and safe radiation. The basic idea here is that radiation travels in waves, and if that wave is carrying enough energy, it can cause damage on the molecular level. On the other hand, if it's low energy, non-ionizing radiation, the radiation isn't going to be able to cause any sort of molecular damage. Safe kinds of radiation include things like radio waves, infrared light, visible light. Ionizing radiation, though, is a different story, and that's the kind of dangerous radiation that you'd be worried about in a post-nuclear fallout world. It's associated with radiation sickness, which includes all kinds of nasty things like nausea and vomiting in the short term, and infections and bleeding and dehydration several days to weeks out. Radiation
Case in point, it'll make you very, very sick. Bad!
sickness can hit you fast and it can hit you long. You could be displaying symptoms within a single hour, and those could last for several months. It can be fatal in the short term, and even if you manage to survive the short-term effects, you'll be at an increased risk of leukemia and other particularly deadly kinds of cancer.
Case in point, cancers. Bad.
So suffice it to say, ionizing radiation is not the kind of thing that you want to be messing with, and it is definitely not the kind of thing that you want to be consuming into your body. So you
Please
might
don't.
assume then that ionizing radiation bad means that food hit by ionizing radiation is also bad, but that's not exactly true. What you really want to avoid is ionizing radiation hitting you. See, any object that emits radiation is said to be radioactive, and any object or person that gets hit by radiation is said to be irradiated. Take Take sunlight, for example. The sun produces radiation that's strong enough to cause sunburns to our skin, but objects like beach sand or sunglasses that have been left out in the sun don't cause sunburn. So here's the takeaway here. Objects that have been hit by radiation are irradiated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're dangerous. The ones you have to look out for are the ones that are emitting their own radiation, the ones that are themselves radioactive.
Radioactive, radioactive, whoa, 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 radioactive, radioactive, all systems down. I'm sorry, I just love the song.
Radioactive food is going to be bad for all the reasons you would imagine it to be bad. If just being close enough to radioactive material is enough to do damage to your body, you can imagine it's going to be a lot worse when that radioactive material is sitting there in your stomach. Irradiated food, on the other hand, is actually totally safe to eat. Eating food that's been hit by radiation, even the high-energy, dangerous ionizing radiation, is actually shockingly common. In fact, if you live in the United States, you've probably eaten food that's been hit by ionizing radiation, not as a form of accidental contamination or anything, but as a way to intentionally make that food safer to eat. That same ionizing radiation that turns out to be so dangerous to humans is also dangerous to the organisms that cause foodborne illnesses. You've probably heard of salmonella and E. coli, things like that. Those are names of specific bacteria, and bacteria are living organisms that can be killed by ionizing radiation. You can literally kill the bacteria that's on the food by blasting the food with radiation. The same is true of insects and all sorts of other little critters that might threaten the shelf life of food. Irradiation can be a great way to sterilize foods and allow them to be stored for years without refrigeration. And this is something that's already in widespread use across the real world. If you see this symbol on a food product, it means that it was treated using radiation. Now, that seems like it might be scary, right? But if you're freaking out about it, remember, we're not talking about radioactive food, we're talking about irradiated food, which is not radioactive. You're not gonna be sprouting a third limb from spending too much time in the produce aisle at your local grocery store, because even though you might be surrounded by fruit that was irradiated, you yourself are not being exposed to the radiation, even if the food was. What you do have to be concerned about, though, is direct contact with radioactive material. Say a plant was carried through a radioactive area and got radioactive material stuck to its leaves. Well, then you could be exposed to that radioactive material as a result of eating or coming into contact with the plant, or more specifically, the debris that the plant tracked with it. If you think the idea of radioactive material accidentally getting onto the food sounds implausible, well, think again. The game that got me started on this whole episode, Fallout, gets its name from the concept of nuclear fallout.
Yes, case in point, the things that fell out of the sky. After the kaboom! Yeah! AKA apocalypse.
Basic idea is that after a nuclear blast, residual radioactive material gets propelled into the upper atmosphere and then falls out of the sky after the initial explosion, covering the landscape with radioactive dust and ash. And these tiny particles of radioactive dust and ash can become a big problem. Some bits of radioactive material are so small that they can slip into the crevices in your individual hairs. Yeah, your hairs have small crevices so tiny you probably can't see them, and radioactive dust can be even smaller than that. Pro tip, by the way, if you find yourself wanting to wash radioactive dust out of your hair, better bet, just shave off your head. You're not going to be able to get it all. Hopefully your hair grows back. And unfortunately, that radioactive fallout is the stuff that you have to worry about in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Small radioactive bits that are so small, you're probably not going to see them. That radioactive fallout gets blasted into the air when the bombs go down, and when it comes down, it's going to cover everything. That's why you really, really want to be in your underground bunker when the bombs go off. Even if the blast isn't close to you, you could be in danger just from the stuff that's in the air. So keep the doors locked tight until the dust literally settles. So that's probably the biggest issue for a sole survivor looking to eat and survive in the long term. If nuclear fallout is rained down onto the soil itself, how on earth are you supposed to farm and get food? For an answer, we turn to the real world, specifically Chernobyl, the site of the infamous 1986 nuclear accident that left over 39,000 square miles contaminated with nuclear fallout.
And case in point, right now it's in the year 2022, there is the unfortunate invasion into Ukraine. That said, please don't. Please. No war, please. No war. Come on, man.
Good news, plenty of plants have had success growing in the radioactive soil. Besides natural vegetation like trees and grass, brassicas was successfully grown in the soil as well. And if you think that brassicas sounds like it might be a relative of the broccoli family, yeah, you're right. I suppose it would be more accurate to say that broccoli is a part of the brassicas genus, along with things like cabbage, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, basically
Yeah, so case in point, very educational stuff.
Anything and everything you hated to eat when you were a kid, and maybe still as an adult now. If you hate that stuff, well, hashtag blame Brassicus. But here's the bad news, friends. Scientists tested the plants that were grown in the radioactive soil.
Hey, know that. I just noticed when I was growing up, if you cook it properly, if you cook it in a combination of different ingredients, you can make it seems very tasteful. It looks delicious and healthy, so win-win. So if your children doesn't like it, you improve your cooking skills. Great. So yeah.
And found that the plants contained radioactive isotopes. So
Oh.
you could grow crops like broccoli and cabbage in radioactive soil, but you're not gonna be able to eat them unless you wanna get radiation sickness. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait, how is it that the crops themselves became radioactive? I thought we established earlier that food exposed to radiation was safe to eat. Well, the big difference here is that the plants aren't just irradiated, they actually become radioactive via absorption. As it turns out, plants can absorb radioactive particles in the soil in exactly the same way that they absorb nutrients and minerals from the soil. According to Dr. Michael Blaylock, who works as a soil scientist, quote, radioisotopes mimic some of the nutrients that the plants take up normally. And so the plant really doesn't distinguish between those radioactive isotopes and some of the nutrients like potassium and calcium.
I just love it that MadPats include him as being a soil scientist. We need individuals like this who contribute some benefits, positive things to the society for us. Thank you so much. Respect.
So that's some pretty bad news for our farming project. Another piece of bad news is that the radioactivity in the plants that are growing in the radioactive soil can also affect the animals that eat those plants, and the predators that then eat those animals. And yes, that includes us humans. Remember how plants weren't really great at distinguishing between radioactive isotopes and legit nutrients? Well, animals' bodies aren't too great at it either. In many parts of Norway affected by the Chernobyl disaster, all animals have to be tested for radiation before they can be slaughtered and safely processed for human consumption. This isn't just something that happened back in the 80s and 90s either. Even to this day, more than 3 decades later, there are still 37 Norwegian municipalities that have to test the animals for radiation before eating them. So
Case in point, do you recognize that the Animal Crossing reference? I'm sorry, I'm a nerd in the gaming scene. Sorry.
if you decide to start raising cattle in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, you have gotta be careful about what you're feeding them. Make sure your grass-fed beef isn't grazing on grass that was grown in radioactive soil. So if we can't grow crops in radioactive soil or eat animals that have eaten said crops, how the heck are we supposed to get any sort of food? Is it hopeless? No, actually.
No, we can learn from Japan. We dig up those that's infected one, toss to one side, and the one that is beneath, raise it up, and you can grow it with that.
Answer might seem kind of boring, but the solution is
Remove it.
simple. Scrape away the contaminated soil. See, when the radioactive fallout settles, it's gonna fall on the topsoil. Topsoil, as you can imagine from the meaning of the words top and soil,
They're the top of the soil.
the upper outermost layer of soil, which is usually 5 to 10 inches thick. Scrape that away very carefully so as to not allow the contaminants to seep any deeper, and you've got yourself suddenly non-contaminated soil underneath. This boring solution of just scraping off the layer of topsoil to get rid of the contamination is exactly what was done in Japan following the Fukushima power plant disaster of 2011.
Get it? Boring? Because you have to bore the things out.
It was certainly no small task, with the amount of topsoil being removed weighing in at millions of tons. So you're gonna have to find a place to put all of that contaminated soil, but once you've got it all out of the way, literally, you've got yourself the basis for farming crops. So as a review, here's what is and isn't safe to eat in a post-apocalypse. 1. Food that was produced before the fallout. Even if it was exposed to radiation, it's safe to eat. Just make sure to wash off any potentially radioactive fallout dust that might be on it. And no, cooking radioactive food does not cause it to become unradioactive, despite what the cooking system in the Fallout games would have you believe. 2. Food that was grown after the bombs dropped is only safe to eat if you know for sure that it grew in non-contaminated soil. Plants grown in radioactive soil are going to contain those radioactive isotopes that you do not want in your belly. And finally, number 3, you should probably give up on hunting wild animals, unless you can be very, very, very sure that those animals didn't eat any plants that grew in contaminated soil, which is basically impossible if the bombs are dropping everywhere. Besides, if the video game Fallout has taught me anything, you're probably going to want to save that ammunition for other uses.
When you emerge from the comfort and safety of your vault, the world you know will have changed. Take your friendly old neighbor, Johnny. rather than coming over to borrow a cup of sugar, he may now be coming over for murder.
That's right. Once the word gets out that
Okay.
you have this amazing topsoil-free farm underway, you'll likely have plenty of dinner guests stopping by. There's no shortage of ways to die in a lawless radioactive wasteland, but survival begins with a balanced radioactive-free diet. But hey, that's just a theory. A food theory. Bon appetit. And hey, if you thought this episode was interesting, find out where in the world you want to live in the event of a zombie apocalypse. So if you're less worried about nuclear fallout and more worried about walkers knocking down your door, click the video that you see on screen right now. That'll teach you where in the world is the single best place to live in the event of a zombie apocalypse. That one's over on Game Theory, so just a lot of cross-pollination between the channels, my friends. Watch them all, because who knows? The way 2020 is going, some of this information might be more useful sooner than you think. I'll see you next week.
Well, we didn't use it for 2 years, so lucky us. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you find this video very interesting to watch. If you do like this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and comment down below if you have anything to share with us. Don't forget to follow my channel to see appreciate all of the support and encouragement from the world. Thank you all so much for the best. I hope to see you in my next video. But hey, that's just a theory, a food theory. Bon appetit. Thank you. And hope to see you all in my next video. Bye bye. Thank you so much. Subscribe. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I said all this in one breath.